Welcome to the Influence Equation, the space where we break down how extraordinary voices shift culture, create change, and leave a legacy. So today's conversation is deeply personal to me. My guest is filmmaker, activist, festival leader, educator, friend who has spent her life amplifying children's voices, archiving memory, and reminding us that stories shape nations. Firdoze Bulbulia is an award-winning producer of feature films and documentaries, a trainer and educator, a lifelong champion for children and youth in media. She has chaired the Children and Broadcasting Foundation for Africa, helped deliver the World Summit on Media for Children. She also directs initiatives such as the Nelson Mandela Children's Film Festival and has been part of a legacy work connected to Mandela's Africa. We will unpack her journey, her turning points, and a personal influence equation. She's also my dear friend, someone I've traveled the world with, laughed with, and learned from. So with that enormous introduction, welcome, Firdoze Bulbulia.
Oh, thank you, Katie. It's wonderful to be here.
What is the first memory that told you that storytelling could move systems and not just hearts?
I must have been in primary school. I was in Standard 1 doing Afrikaans, and we had to do this little play. And, you know, my mother is a wonderful dressmaker. My sisters are designers, but at those days they were dressmakers, my mom. And she made me this beautiful outfit for Eid. And then it was this thing that a teacher said we should do. It was about a skoen maak reg my skoen. You know, it was an Afrikaans little play. And I was so excited because I thought I'm going to wear this beautiful dress. And we rehearsed it and rehearsed it and rehearsed it, and eventually it didn't happen. And it was the most, I think, disappointing moment for me as a child, because I believed that through this little act, we were telling a story about how people were helping each other. So that was Standard 1. I must have been, 8 or 9 years old?
So, and I've seen that in most rooms that you walk into, and I would stand corrected to say even you've been to the UNESCO halls, right? You've been to the UNESCO halls, you've been to small villages. It's never just about media with your storytelling. It's also about dignity in the conversations that you're bringing about.
Absolutely. I think the point which I'm raising, talking about being 9 or 8 or 9 years old, is that we grow up in a South Africa that is apartheid. Mm-hmm. And you wonder in the spaces you can enter. And then as you become a storyteller and a filmmaker and you go into different spaces, particularly as we worked on HIV and AIDS, and I'm in countries that are really deprived, and I look at the children. I always look at the children because it's that connection with the child, and you see it in their faces. You know, right now you look at Palestine and you see it in the faces of the child. And I'm always saying to people that there's not one story to tell. We are not just one character. So when you see the child being sad, you must know the child is also happy. You must know that the child also laughs. And you must know that there is a hope around that child. And so I think it's important that, yes, whether one is at the UN or UNESCO or any of these United Nations organizations, that at the end of the day, these are ordinary people who were children once. And they understand that shift.
So you've produced many feature films and, of course, documentaries. Which project best taught you to marry art with advocacy, and why?
I think one of the programs that really touched my heart was when Madiba, our beloved Nelson Mandela, had his 78th birthday, so it wasn't even the 80th. And we were asked to film the storytelling around the provinces. And I remember going to the Eastern Cape, and these people were just excited to be invited to Madiba's birthday. And basically what he wanted to do was to thank people for the work that they had done. He was in prison, he was unaware or aware, probably through the conversations and the information he received, but the people in ordinary spaces doing extraordinary things. And I remember standing in this line with a gentleman who all he had was the covering of a shoe. He had no sole. There was no sole on the shoe, mm-hmm. Just the covering. And you know, Madiba's birthday is in July, which is winter in South Africa. And I watched this, I get goosebumps as I tell you the story. I watched this man with such dignity and so much excitement that he had been invited and that he was dressed up for the occasion. And I think it is in that moment that you see a different story, a story about somebody who has worked so hard in his community and yet is so revered and excited to meet Madiba, and that he understands that in that process there is some decorum, there is some form of dress, there is a certain way in which you get received and you receive the person. And my heart broke, because I think in all the spaces, as you say, we go in and out of spaces and we see people at really high levels and, you know, dressed to the nines, and you wonder what they've done. And then you see this gentleman who's standing in line, in a long line of waiting, not even to meet Madiba, but to get into the venue. And he's in this cold winter, and you know, the dignity with that. And I think that's what storytelling does. And it's how do we perceive it? How do we as individuals look beyond that picture?
Because you often say that storytelling is not just entertainment. It is really about identity and memory, and this is exactly what you're talking about. Can you take us to a moment in your early career when you realized that stories could actually change how people see themselves?
Absolutely. I think I come back to the HIV/AIDS series that we did, and we traveled to probably 10 or 12 African countries. And in Ghana was a moment where a woman was actually dying of AIDS, and she had decided to tell the story, and her family were not prepared for it, and they didn't want her to tell the story. But it was her dignity. It was her choice to tell the story, and as storytellers, we gave her the space to do that. The sad thing after that was that she died, and we subsequently learnt that it was the family who were probably involved in her death. And that is because they didn't want her to tell the story, because it was, how does it impact them as a family? So I think when we tell stories, we have a huge responsibility, and the responsibility is around the people whom we impact and the people whose stories are being told. There's another situation. We were in Ethiopia, and this person was probably transgender, and she came up to us. And in the Ethiopian situation, if you were HIV negative, it was actually worse, because you wanted to be positive because you were going to get all these wonderful things that came with it, because government was throwing all kinds of things because you're positive and you needed support. And she came up and she said to us that she's HIV positive, that her family are not aware, but that she wanted us to come and film with her. And I, as the storyteller, as the producer, I was concerned, and I said to her, but you know, if you talk to us, not only your family, but your entire country will know your story. Are you sure that you want your story to be told? And she had created in her mind that she was this wonderful actress. And she literally lived right on the top of the hill. It was quite a treacherous drive to the top of the hill. And then to see the setup that she had and her friends around her. And she had probably told them all that she's going to have this opportunity to share her story. And she was dressed up, and it was really kind of glamorous in a way. And we filmed with her, but we never used film.
You didn't?
Because we believed that she needed to first tell her family, that people around, and I think we have that responsibility as storytellers, that people want to tell a story, but they don't know how it might impact them later. And we don't want to take that responsibility. I think, you know, it's the story of, if you remember, they called it the Bang Bang Club. This was during apartheid, when, you know, we had the necklacing in the townships. And, you know, necklacing is really taking the tire, turning and burning yourself. And many white journalists came into South Africa, international journalists, and they filmed that. Black South African journalists would not, because it is about the dignity of the person who is dying. Besides the fact that you think they've sold out, it's what do you do in that moment?
Because it's about humanity.
It's about humanity.
And I've seen that with you when we went to the Zanzibar Film Festival, is how you you had all the youngsters share their stories. And I looked at it as you giving them a platform for healing. How do you think that these festivals, especially within the continent, that you head up and that you work with closely, actually contributes to changing narratives at scale?
I think the idea of storytelling, and I think this is coming back again to South Africa, that as activists, I was a student activist, I went to prison. I was only 17 years old at the time, but I believed that it was important to fight apartheid. And I remember going to the first World Summit on Media for Children in Australia. And at that time, it was in 1995, South Africa had just won its elections, 94. And I arrived there and I said, oh my gosh, this is like a conference about children, for children, without children. Where are the children? And all these people who were, who's were like, oh my God, well, we don't want children here. And I said, in South Africa, we were just thinking, part of the debate was whether 16-year-olds should be given the vote. And the reason for that is that 16-year-olds changed the trajectory of South Africa. It was 16-year-olds and younger who said to their parents, stop drinking. We need to be fighting, for freedom. So when you say, how does one gauge that? I understand the voice of the child. And I always say that that is why, in your introduction, you said I work with children and youth media, because I think that's where we make the difference. Once the child is beyond 16, they've already decided who they are. There's not much of an intervention. But when they are 6 years old, they're pliable. The minds are pliable. You can change them. You can influence them. And you can give them a voice. But when you give them a voice, allow them to be prepared. Because what happens is we say, let's have these 3 children and they're going to tell us their story. Yes. But the 3 adults were given time, were given opportunity to prepare, are writing a speech, and now they're presenting. The 3 children are suddenly like, so cute to have.
And they're speaking from their heart. And
I disagree with that, because I believe that they should also be given the opportunity. They should also be given time to prepare. They should also be ready to represent their heart in the same way that the adult has been given.
And they have a different level of pride as well.
Of course.
Because they try and they rehearse and they try.
Yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So you come from a scholar practitioner. Now you're pursuing a PhD while staying hands-on in a lot of the productions. What are you studying right now, and how is this reshaping your practices?
So my PhD is on the Firdoze Women's Group. And the Firdoze Women's Group, we started in 1983 as young activists. So I was detained in 1980. By 1983, this is during the time of the UDF. UDF is just coming, the United Democratic Front. Most organizations have been banned, and it's how are we beginning to help the community of Firdoze. I come from Firdoze, which is just downtown, very close to where I was detained at John Vorster Square. There's the Oriental Plaza, etc. And the story of the Firdoze Women's Group has not been written about. And unfortunately, in scholarship, if you haven't written the story, it does not exist. You're not part of the canon, which is what they say. And I wanted that story to be told. I thought that the voices of all those women, and what is amazing is that many of those women are actually senior people within government. We have Fatima Hajjaj, for example, who became at some point even our Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. She'd come from Firdoze. She'd come from a little home in Firdoze where she grew up, and the work that she had done. Late Firdoze Adam from the Ferreirastown. My sister Nadia Bulbulia, who is, the executive director of the National Association of Broadcasters. Leila Patel, who Kachalia now, who was from Cape Town and is a professor at UJ. University of Johannesburg. So all of these people, I needed their stories to be told, but within the ambit of the Firdoze Women's Group. But also then the women of Firdoze, the women of the Oriental Plaza, people who ran shops, who used their shops as a cover-up for conversations, for political information, for sharing. And so it is that story that I'm telling. And I think the way in which I've done it is it's a creative PhD, so I did a production at the Oriental Plaza to just people on a Saturday afternoon so that they understood what our story is, and then a documentary based on that. And all of my interviews were done using mobile phones, kind of breaking down the stereotype of how do we tell story. We can tell story through interviews, we can tell story through TikTok now. It's really how do you take these different creative formats, put it together and tell the story.
So on the influence equation, we always pause to look at life's pivots, the moments that change us, that demand courage and redirect our paths. You've said memory can be a weapon against erasure. How do oral history and archives protect communities, especially artists, children, traders?
I'm so happy that you mentioned memory is a weapon. When we grew up as activists, for me, memory is a weapon meant that your memory will never die, whether you are detained, exiled, or killed. Uncle Don Matera wrote a book that said memory is the weapon because he was talking about his life. And within scholarship, memory is a weapon is often mentioned. And I remember at the time when I mentioned to my supervisors, that this is what I was going to use, and they kind of laughed at me. And to them it was, it's often used. And I felt quite deflated because as an activist, it meant something so strong and so deep. So that the memory, somebody else said to me, it sounded violent because why should it be a weapon? And I think it's what do you weaponize? You weaponize memory?
It's about like resistance, isn't it?
It's a resistance.
Yes.
Absolutely. So I don't see it as a weapon. I see not as a weapon in a violent way. Yeah. I see it as a weapon in a strong way, and in a way in which we are affirming who we are and our memories. Yeah. And memory is important, especially now as my mother is failing. Her memory is failing. My mother's, it's age-related, whether it's dementia. And you sit there and you listen to her and you realize that some of the stories she tells you that are fading, that we're losing. So the way in which we as storytellers keep that memory alive, and we keep it alive through our telling stories, but through performance. So part of the work that I do, there's a scholar called Diana Taylor, and she talks about the archive and the repertoire. And the archive is how we document story. And whose story do we tell? Because in the white South Africa, whose story was being told? The repertoire is in the performance. So when I do the story at the creative piece at the Oriental Plaza, and I say to the women, wear your white sari, because we're thinking about 1963, when the Indian women marched to the Union buildings in white saris, a sari which represents mourning, and talking about the Group Areas Act. You are through the body, through the embodiment, through the clothing, you are telling a layered story. And most people will say, the 1956 march, because that is the story. How do we ensure that within those stories, the story of the South African Indian, especially now we're talking indenture, which has just happened, in this period. How do we talk about indenture in the way that we tell the story of Indian South Africans who have fought the struggle? And for Black South Africans, it's a big shock because currently that story is not being told. We know it as we grew up because we were part of apartheid. But as the shifts have happened, the story of Indian people and their struggles and their support for a new South Africa is being lost. And the memory thereof is important.
I remember you did say to me once that if we don't record, we disappear, right? And I think capturing these voices are more than just history. It's protection. It's protection of the truth, because people, if you do not record, if you do not tell the stories, people are going to tell the stories about us. Yes. So this storytelling is protecting our legacies.
It's the story, as they say, of the hunter or the hunted, right?
Yes.
And so the African proverb is that for as long as the lion is telling the story or not telling the story of the hunt or the hunted will be told. So I like to actually then go back to Thabo Mbeki's father, Governor Mbeki, who said, what kind of a people allow their stories to be told by others? And he qualifies it in that process, and he says by whites. And by whites meaning the colonizer, How are we allowing other people to tell our story? And therefore, what you are doing, Katie, is important because you're allowing the voices of the ordinary people who might be extraordinary in some ways, but it's the ordinary people who can tell their story, and to give them that platform so that they can, you're amplifying that voice, and it needs to be done. And so that again, I come back to the children's voices and why it is important to tell their story. We also have the Africa Charter on Children's Broadcasting that says children should hear, see, and express themselves, their languages and their life experiences through the electronic media that reaffirms their sense of self, community, and place. Because if you have not affirmed who you are as an Indian child, as a Muslim child, yay, shout out to Zahran Mamdani, think about it. You could be in a little box somewhere and people have a story to tell about you when you should be telling your own story.
And I think it's important because back in the days, telling your own story seemed like you were a bit arrogant, egotistical, and now we are telling our story with humility because it is not only the wisdom that we're sharing, it is a story of truths, and it's our truths. So when you realized that you were pivoting in your career and it was not just about passion now, it was, this is my life's work, when was that?
I think the issue that you probably raise is this word that everybody likes to use, which is intentional. You have to be intentional about things. I have to say that my life trajectory has really not been intentional. I started off having been detained, so I didn't go to university. I was a locum teacher. I then went to teachers training college. I then went with my matric students back to university, did a dramatic arts degree because I wanted to teach drama. I wanted to do all that. And then, that didn't really materialize. I then joined in the city of Johannesburg, which was Arts Alive, and that was exciting. And then went off and did, a lot of work in documentary filmmaking, particularly in the area of HIV/AIDS, documentaries about women, about youth, etc. Then did a master's in African studies, went all the way to the US to do a master's, and came back, continued working, as you said in the opening. We hosted the World Summit on Media for Children. So we've been pushing this thing, about children's voices, young people's voices. And I seem to continue to do that because I think it's the politics of the day. It was the politics of apartheid. It was the politics of democracy. It's now going to be the politics of post-apartheid, post-democracy. We again sitting in a position where we're saying, oh my goodness, we fought for freedom. We fought for democracy, and look what is happening. And we're not happy with what is happening. So how do we pick up the baton again? How does that activism come back? And artivism, because that's always, for me, it's art. It's the art of the activism. How do we make sure that we continue that? Because you cannot be an armchair revolutionary. You cannot, and so many people do that. You sit and you complain and you say, oh, I wish they would. No.
But what are you doing about it?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I see that even when I pivoted from broadcasting into this entrepreneurship, and similar to you, it was the courage, because it's a risk that you have to start taking. Because you have the safe path, of course, being a teacher seemed to have been a safe path. You have to be courageous to take this risk of something that is new. And as women, back in the days with you as well, not a lot of women took those risks. And here you are, you learn this courage. Do you think about where that courage stemmed from?
As you say, as women, because there are many people who pull you down, and I remember talking to Felicia Mambuza-Satel at some point, and she was talking about these frogs, they pull you down. And I wondered whether that had happened in my trajectory. And I didn't really feel that. I think that people really boosted me. Or maybe I assumed they were boosting me and they were not. Because that's also the thing, right? But sometimes you've got to be headstrong and you've got to be determined, and you have to say, I'm fighting for a bigger story. I'm fighting for something that's larger than me. And you're right. because you're breaking out of what is traditional. And I've been told, as I said, my mom's saying, that big mouth of yours. I've had people say, why do you want to be in the limelight? Why do you think it's about you?
But people see that having a voice and trying to use your voice is about being in the limelight, because I get that often as well. But what you're trying to do is use your voice to amplify other voices,
Absolutely.
to make sure that people are seen and heard.
Yes. And I think people don't recognize that enough because they don't understand it. But for us working in the sector, you understand that you're creating platforms. I mean, I think I put this out the other day on Facebook about gatekeeping. Who are the gatekeepers? And then I saw somebody else talk about gateways. And he was saying, oh, but you do need gateways because you need to keep out the sludge and you need... And I was like, what are you saying exactly?
Sounds like a victim mentality there as
and
well.
it's not fair.
Yeah.
Because we're not talking gateway, we're talking gatekeepers.
And it's the truth.
Open the space for people.
And you are so... And I think I commented on your Facebook as well. You are never a gatekeeper. It's not part of your vocabulary. You will get invited to an event. You are bringing a +5 because you want to share that experience with others, because people walk away from there. So you've moved from creating films to creating platforms to individual projects. You've created a collective movements, but through this, and we talk about how the puller Down syndrome, and I know that was also a huge pivot for you when you stepped into festival leadership. And I know that one specific, film festival that you had, you did experience that, but you had to hold yourself through it with grace.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I think that's important, the word grace. Because how do we do it with grace? How do we do it where people feel that they've been taken part of and they're being brought along? Because people can very easily feel left out. And it's really, for me, it's about stepping almost into the shoes of other people and saying, create the space. People have said to me, why do you give others a space? It's interesting because there are those who say you want the limelight and others are saying, oh, why are you giving other people the space? The point is really that as much as possible, take people with you. I remember when I used to be in Germany at the Prix Festival, and the head of the festival would say to me, Firdoze, and only you are invited. Do not bring all those others.
And you won't listen.
And I won't.
Yes.
Because I think that the people, especially in the majority world, we represent the majority.
Yeah.
The North is so quick at keeping people out. If we are going to be part of that narrative, we are doing a disservice to the people from where we come from.
And what I see is you don't just open doors, you walk in with them. And we often talk about mentorship and how we mentor others. And one of your mentors has been one of South Africa's great filmmakers. Tell us about him, Jamil.
Well, Jamil Kubeka came to us when he made his first film. And literally, he came to us every day for 9 months and sat around our kitchen table as we wrote the script for the next film.
And he's still sitting in your kitchen table.
He still is. And you know what's amazing is that he recognizes now, because now we've got a younger group, right? So we've got Dipopai, the animators, we've got another group of young people. And he was like, oh my gosh, Daddy, he calls Faith Daddy. And he's like, oh my gosh, Daddy, you're still doing this. And I think that was the shift for Faith as well, because Faith is a celebrated, British filmmaker. And when he joined this relationship, he realized that it's not about him. It is about the people that we can train. It's about the people we can develop. It's about the people that grow. And so I'm continuously having a younger generation of storytellers whom we are mentoring. And so Jamil has done extremely well. I keep saying to people, it's the Spike Lee of South Africa. He's done extremely well, and Yellowbone is doing so well. But let him fly, because there's another lot of people that also need to be given.
And you still call him to order after today as well?
Of course.
Yes, you do.
Of course. And you know what he does, which is really quite funny, because when he sees Faith, because Faith's Nigerian, but in the Yoruba culture, and Faith's not Yoruba, the person, doesn't matter who you are, you could be a minister, but if you see your elder, you prostrate on the floor, you go right flat down. And Jamil does that every time he sees Uncle Faith.
I've seen you in a room filled with tension, And you're always somebody that tries to stand up there and offer a solution. I mean, I've traveled with you, and I've watched how you mediate with such calm authority. Was that something you had to hone in on it? Because I don't think we just automatically have that over the years. How did you get to hone in onto that calm authority?
I don't know if I'm always calm. I think I'm sometimes quite, people think aggressive. But I think, and people say that to me. They're like, you're always fighting, Firdoze. It's not about fighting. It's about taking a position and being very clear
and assertive
and very informed. Mm-hmm. So when I'm assertive, it's because I have the information.
Yep.
I'm not coming in there and just, blah, blahing. I think it is important that we remain affirmed. I was at... yesterday, the John Carney Academy that was just launched, kudos to him. But part of the story for me is you need it when you're younger, at 60, not at 82. Of course, at 82, you are so revered. But at 60, what could you have given to younger people? I chaired the Gauteng Arts Council in the early years of our democracy, and I chaired it for almost 10 years. And during that time, my idea was around mentorship. It was about how do we help people all the time to build themselves. Mm-hmm. So as I said, I don't know if I am calm, but I'm certainly assertive, because I think that we have the history of the struggle behind us, and we almost have a way of where we want to be in the future.
I've seen you in a room filled with tension, and you're always somebody that tries to stand up there and offer a solution. I mean, I've traveled with you, and I've watched how you mediate with such calm authority. Was that something you had to hone in on it? Because I don't think we just automatically have that over the years. How did you get to hone in onto that calm authority?
I don't know if I'm always calm. I think I'm sometimes quite, people think aggressive. But I think, and people say that to me. They're like, you're always fighting, Firdoze. It's not about fighting. It's about taking a position and being very clear
and assertive
and very informed. So when I'm assertive, it's because I have the information.
Yeah.
I'm not coming in there and just, blah, blahing.
And I think you've... Your influence is also, it's become about legacy now. It's really about, it's moved from what I can achieve to what can I unlock for others. And I think it's very clear. And you've modeled it for so many people, including me, in various spaces. And I think I want to say to you that sometimes you do so much for people. I don't know if anybody tells you that you do so much for people. And you do. Because you have a selfless heart, and you are everybody's big sister. And yes, sometimes we don't like what you say, but you share it with such love, and your assertiveness over the years comes with deep-rooted sisterly love. It's not because you want to bully anybody. It is because you want us to know that you care and that you want us to be better. And I love that about you. If I've never ever told that, I'm telling that to you now. I love that about you. So on the show, we believe influence is not about titles or power. It's about how your voice, joined with your story, creates impact that lasts. And Firdoze, let's explore your own influence equation. Influence starts with voice, with what practices or rituals protect your voice, especially when we have demands of leadership, when demands of production, and production, I'm talking about work, I'm talking about world production, because every day everything seems so overwhelming. Whose voices do you carry in these rooms of influence when decisions need to be made?
I come back to the same thing. I carry the voice of the child. I carry the voice, and I look at the children. I grew up in Fordsburg and then in New Clare, and I understand struggle. I understand poverty, and I understand too much access. And so when I go into those spaces, I'm thinking about the children, whether they're in Palestine or Soweto, whether we together, as you and I have traveled, whether we were in Greece or we were in Cannes. We know that there is a child in every one of those corners whose voices need to be heard. But I also think what is important, Katie, and it's on a very practical level, about how do you sustain voice. I'm a theatre practitioner. And so part of that is about training the voice, about having the ability to know when to be subtle and when to be loud, about, as you said earlier, grace, about how do you pause, about are you silent, about how do you shout and scream and stand on a pedestal when it is required.
So when you build these stories of children and family, what ethical guardrails are non-negotiable?
Respect. I hate the word tolerance because we can all tolerate, but when we need to respect is beyond tolerance. I need to respect you irrespective of whether I believe you or believe in your position. And I think that's a struggle because, it's hard to respect people who's probably on the opposing side to what you believe in. But I have to give you the space to explain yourself.
So we spoke about voice, now we speak about impact. Impact is what your work has been about, and not just about what your audiences have endured, right? You always say to me, who benefited? And I've started asking myself that question in my own work. Can you give me an example where you saw the ripple effect of a story years after it was told?
Yes, I think, I worked in the area of children and youth media, but I really worked in the area of children's rights. So in 1993, we drew up the South African Children's Rights Charter. And I remember as I walked into spaces of people saying, oh, yes, you that person on children's rights. And it was more kind of condescending. But I was so happy. I was so happy that people saw me as the children's rights person because that was important to me. And I remember teachers saying to me, oh, you're giving them these rights. They're going to be so rude in the class. And I said, with rights come responsibilities.
Yeah.
And we pushed that line. And the Children's Charter, the South African Children's Charter, became part of the Bill of Rights in South Africa. And that is important to me because I feel that I've been part of that institution of ensuring the rights of the child, but also then the rights of every other human being.
So currently you sit here, you're all of 63 years old, and you have the chutzpah of that 9-year-old still. Who inspires you today?
Wow, I think there are many people who inspire me. One of the other dedications I gave was my father. And I said, this is for Ahmed Chicks, we used to call him Chix, Chicks Bulbulia, who in some way brought the poetic into the political. And I think it's that being able to transition from what is poetry to what is political, to what is important, to how do we fight this battle. And so the mentorships of the people who we read. Right now, I have to say Zohran Mamdani is really the person he's 34 years old. For a 34-year-old to have worked
African.
for 6 years, for 6 years to say, I will make a difference in New York City. That's just the best. I thought I didn't want to go to the US for a while. And now I'm saying, Christmas in New York City, because I think it is about how we elevate these people, even if they don't know who you are.
Firdoze, you inspire me. All our time together, I've drawn so much strength from you, even though you say you're not calm, but from your calm, your humor, your conviction, and sometimes even in my lowest moments, I think about what would you say, what would you do to, for me. So. And that's how close your influence is to me. So as with the influence equation, we draw up our influence, and I would like for you to read out your influence equation and tell me that we got it right, hopefully.
Thank you. So voice, story, and impact. I think I said absolutely about voice. And, I think what you've done in terms of your research and how you saw me in the space has been really phenomenal. And I appreciate that because I think you have gone through what is important. The story is about preserving memory
and identity, yes.
And I think for us as Black South Africans. You know, for a very long time, I saw myself as a Black South African, but as I did the research, I had to find my Indian identity. And that has been a talent space, an important space. And that, I think, is also where you sit, because that is an important space for you in terms of your identity.
So Firdoze, your journey shows us that influence is not about how loud we speak. It's about how deeply we listen, how courageously we carry our stories forward. You've built platforms that will continually shaping generations long after. And that is a legacy worth celebrating. So thank you for sharing your equation with us today. And thank you for sharing your journey.
Thank you for inviting me.
Until next time, this has been The Influence Equation. I'm Katie Mohammed. Stay inspired, stay intentional, and above all, stay true.